Recently, I switched from editing on a Mac to editing on a PC or Windows machine, and I just wanted to talk to you about what that experience was like. When I used a Mac, I had this is a i7. I think it's a 2.4 gigahertz. I'll put the specs in the notes so you can see it if you're interested. It has an Nvidia card in it. It's one of the last Macs that was sold with Nvidia in it. It has 512 gigabytes of SSD in it. It has 16 gigs of RAM. Now, for everyday storage, I have this Thunderbolt G-RAID G drive. It's not a RAID. For video editing, I would use the G-RAID. For archive storage, I use the Drobo. And that worked pretty well. But I found that there was definitely some aspects of the video editing experience which I hope to improve with a new computer. So I picked this one up. This is an i7 8700K with 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gigabytes of SSD, MVME drive. For video editing, instead of using a RAID, I'm using 2 terabytes of SSD. And I just want to talk to you a little bit about how things went. First off, being a Mac guy for so long, I found the transition surprisingly easy in terms of how to use the operating system. I did run into some issues because normally I capture my video on Atomos recorders, SSDs like this in ProRes, and that was a concern for me how this was going to work. And the Windows machine will edit the ProRes perfectly fine. It has no problem with the ProRes. I did have an issue because one of the cameras uses a recorder. It's an older recorder, and it records in FAT32. What that means is it breaks the files up instead of the long continuous files that I would get on this. Because I do event videography where the cameras are running for a long period of time, that creates a hiccup in the workflow. What that meant is, you can see on this drive here, I put the DNX equivalents of ProRes on there so I can have it as a quick and easy reference. So if for whatever reason while I was editing or I wanted to convert something into a ProRes-like codec, that I would have an option. Because as far as I can see, there is no easy way to create ProRes in this environment. So if I needed to export something in a high quality codec, initially I was doing that with the Avid DNX format. However, recently I've switched from DNX to Cineform. and Cineform is a great codec, and it also works in, it's a 10-bit codec. It's very high quality, and you can actually have 10-bit with alpha channel in case you're doing some compositing, or in some cases I do some animation and whatever. So the Cineform is an excellent way to export a ProRes-like sort of environment, a ProRes substitute, and then mixing a project that has ProRes, Cineform, or DNX HD is no problem on here. One of the glitches I had in this environment was I thought that USB 3 would be a simple substitute for Thunderbolt. It's not. This particular dock here takes Thunderbolt and breaks it into USB 3, so I have lots of different connectors here. So I all these drives, these 3 drives here, are all Thunderbolt, and this little drive bay here is USB 3. On the Windows side of things, and the nice thing about USB or Thunderbolt is you can daisy chain things, and so connecting stuff together is pretty easy. Despite the fact that this computer is quite new and it uses a modern motherboard, there's a real shortage of USB 3 connectors on here, and you can't daisy chain anything. My original idea was that I would have, because typically I have 3 cameras rolling at any particular time, so I thought if I had 3 SSDs like this here connected by USB 3, that I'd be able to edit with that. That didn't work. First off, most of the USB connections on here are USB 2. Why is there USB 2 in 2018? I don't understand why that USB 2 even still exists in a machine like this, but there it is. And so it was this computer was crashing regularly because the throughput wasn't fast enough. So what I did is I bought a PCI Express card with more USB 3 connectors, and that didn't work either. Still more crashing. And as I discovered is that there's still not enough throughput. If you have one single USB device in that PCIe card, you get USB 3 performance. But if you have 2, 3, 4, all of a sudden you're dividing that throughput through all those connectors, and it's just not fast enough. So a lot of work and whatever. That's how I ended up with a solution using a 2 terabyte SSD, which was expensive, but it does edits smoothly with that. The glitch of that is, of course, you have to transfer the files into the computer. I thought I could just leave the files on here, but I can't do that. And basically that's an environment. I had to do that on the Mac as well. Initially transferring files back and forth between the Mac and the PC was no problem. Took a little bit of digging and some playing with it, but I got both computers to talk to one another, and then somehow that all disappeared. I think it was the April update of Windows 10 that made that impossible. I don't know exactly what happened, but my network still works, but I can't communicate between the Mac and the PC, which is a bit of a pain in the butt. So the way that I work that is, for example, I'll plug this into the Windows machine while I'm after editing, put my files that I want to archive on this little hard drive. This is a spinning hard drive, and it goes on there, and I move it over to the Mac and I put it on the Drobo for archive. It's not a very elegant solution, but it's all I have right now. I did try a Western Digital MyCloud storage that didn't work, so maybe I'll do a little something on that later. One of the things I was going to talk about here is performance. I bought this because I believed that it would be faster. And in many ways it is. Just in everyday use, though, if I'm working on something other than video editing, the startup time, the launch time of all the programs is virtually the same. Now, this is not a scientific test, but I don't find it particularly faster in doing most things. When it comes to video editing, though, on here, it's a night and day difference when it comes to color correction. This has a 1080 Ti in it, as well as the other things. And what I love about it is when I'm trying to match one camera to the other, I get an instant preview. There's no rendering. There is nothing. Yes, this does render a lot faster than this, but that's not it's not a big item because though long term, I think it could be, because how many hours of rendering can you do on a machine like this before the components start to break down? I've used this. This is a 2013, and I've used it pretty heavily all the way through. This one here, I think over long term, this could render. It's got liquid cooling, so and it doesn't even seem to labor when it's rendering. I haven't been able to overclock it because there's been some stability issues with it just running bare bones, everything in its factory default position. This thing crashes. It does crash. It's not crashing so much anymore, but it wouldn't crash doing anything other than video editing. But it has crashed. So when I'm video editing, I am married to my Control S key to keep saving on a regular basis so that I don't lose a bunch of work. I had hoped to be able to overclock this, but even small attempts to overclock it, just going into the BIOS and instead of doing a hacker's kind of proper overclocking, I just select it for performance and indicate that it's got water cooling. It becomes less stable and crashes during video editing. So the idea that I would get 5 gigahertz out of these 6 cores is not happening for me. I know other people have been very successful at doing that, and apparently it's easy. I don't know what if I have a problem with my RAM. The RAM in here is DDR4. It should be good, but I don't know. On the whole, I'm happy with this solution. I'm glad I did it. If I had more money, probably I would have bought, or I would have been inclined to buy the iMac Pro. But the iMac Pro seems to be a little bit of a waste. It's $2,000 extra, yeah, compared to here for me it was about $2,000 more than this machine, and I just didn't think it was worth it. I'm really sort of where a few years ago I was a Mac fanboy. I'm not so much a Mac fanboy anymore, and it was easier for me to make a decision to switch. And so I'm sorry if I rambled on too long, but if you have any questions, don't hesitate to post them. Thanks for watching.